A struggling waitress, barely scraping by, makes the ultimate sacrifice during a quiet dinner shift. She notices an elderly man hesitating over his meal, unable to afford it fully. Without hesitation, she dips into her own meager earnings to pay for his food. It's a simple gesture, but it speaks volumes about her character. This is a journey you won't forget. Sarah had always been a fighter. At 29, she was raising her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, on her own, working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Her mornings began before sunrise, packing lunches and dropping Lily off at daycare before heading to her first job as a cleaner. By noon, she traded her mop for an apron, clocking in at Joe's Diner, where she served plates of comfort food to tired truckers and hurried families. Despite the exhaustion etched into her face, Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity. To her customers, she was the cheerful waitress who remembered orders and greeted everyone with a warm smile. But behind closed doors, reality hit hard. Rent was overdue, her car sputtered whenever it rained, and grocery trips now meant choosing between essentials. One evening, as Sarah tucked Lily into bed, her daughter whispered, "Mommy, when will things get better?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah replied softly, brushing hair from her forehead. "But we'll keep trying. That's all we can do." The next morning, Sarah dragged herself to work, dreading another endless shift. When she arrived at the diner, business was unusually slow. Only a few patrons sat scattered across the booths, including an elderly man seated near the window. Something about him caught her attention. His worn jacket, the frayed edges of his scarf, and the way he stared at the menu as though weighing each item's cost against his wallet. As Sarah approached his table, clipboard in hand, she felt a pang of empathy. This wasn't just a customer. It was someone fighting battles she understood all too well. "What can I get for you today?" she asked brightly, masking her own fatigue. He hesitated, then pointed to the cheapest item on the menu. "Just the soup, please." His voice trembled slightly, betraying uncertainty. Sarah nodded, jotting it down, but her mind raced. How many times had she stood in line at the grocery store, calculating whether she could afford milk or bread? She resolved silently. Tonight, she would make sure he left full and hopeful. As Sarah walked back toward the kitchen, she glanced over her shoulder at the elderly man. His hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses, and he stared out the rain-speckled window with a distant look in his eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was carrying more than just financial worries. Perhaps loneliness, regret, or even shame. When the cook rang the bell signaling the soup was ready, Sarah carefully placed it on a tray along with a slice of bread and a small cup of water. Before delivering the meal, she paused by the register, pulling a few crumpled bills from her tip jar. It wasn't much, just enough to cover his order, but it meant skipping groceries for herself and Lily this week. Still, she didn't hesitate. Balancing the tray, she approached his table with a warm smile. "Here you go," she said, setting the steaming bowl in front of him. "Careful, it's hot." He looked up, gratitude flickering in his tired eyes. "Thank you, miss. You've been very kind." Sarah nodded, then slid the receipt across the table. "No need to worry about the bill. It's already taken care of." The man froze, his weathered hands hovering over the paper. "What do you mean?" "It's on me," she replied simply, shrugging as if it were no big deal. "Everyone deserves a good meal." For a moment he seemed lost for words. Then, tears welled up in his eyes, and he quickly blinked them away. "Young lady, I don't know what to say. This is too generous." "Don't mention it," Sarah said gently, patting his shoulder. "Just enjoy your dinner." As she turned to leave, she noticed a figure sitting nearby, a well-dressed man in his late 40s, watching the exchange intently. He had sharp features and an air of authority, but there was something softer in his gaze as he observed Sarah's kindness. For a brief second, their eyes met, and Sarah offered a polite nod before heading back to the counter. Unbeknownst to her, this stranger was James Thompson, the elderly man's son, and one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city. What he witnessed that night would set off a chain of events neither Sarah nor Mr. Thompson could have anticipated. Meanwhile, the elderly man finished his meal in silence, occasionally glancing at the receipt marked paid with disbelief. By the time he left the diner, his steps felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. Not just financially, but emotionally. And Sarah? She returned to her duties, unaware that her simple act of compassion was about to change everything, for both her and the Thompson family. As the elderly man, Mr. Thompson, stepped out of the diner into the drizzling night, he couldn't shake the warmth that had settled in his chest, a stark contrast to the cold rain pelting his umbrella. He had entered the diner feeling defeated, burdened by both financial strain and the weight of his solitude. But now, thanks to the waitress's unexpected kindness, he felt a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in years. Little did Sarah know, Mr. Thompson wasn't just any customer. Once a celebrated architect, he had spent decades designing iconic buildings across the country. However, a series of poor investments and bad business deals had left him nearly penniless in his later years. Too proud to ask for help from his children, he lived modestly in a small apartment, carefully rationing his Social Security checks to make ends meet. That night, as he walked home, clutching the receipt marked paid, he replayed the waitress's actions in his mind. Her smile, her quiet generosity. It reminded him of simpler times when people looked out for one another without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, James Thompson, who had been sitting nearby during the exchange, followed his father discreetly after paying his own bill. A successful entrepreneur and CEO of a tech startup, James rarely visited his father these days, their relationship strained by years of miscommunication and differing priorities. Yet tonight, something compelled him to stop by the diner unannounced, and what he witnessed left an indelible mark on him. James watched from a distance as his father lingered outside the diner, staring at the receipt with tears glistening in his eyes. Curiosity turned to admiration as James realized the depth of the waitress's sacrifice. Who was this woman, and why would she give up part of her earnings for a stranger? Determined to find out, James returned to the diner the next day, posing as a curious patron. He struck up a conversation with Joe, the diner owner, casually asking about the staff. "That waitress you're talking about, Sarah? She's one of the hardest workers I've ever met," Joe said, leaning against the counter. "Raises a kid on her own, works 2 jobs, never complains. Folks around here love her." Intrigued, James dug deeper, eventually finding Sarah's social media profile. What he discovered moved him even further. Photos of her daughter, Lily, smiling brightly despite wearing hand-me-down clothes. Posts about late-night shifts and struggles to keep their car running. And yet, amidst it all, captions filled with gratitude and determination. "We'll get through this together." James felt a lump rise in his throat. Here was a woman who had so little yet gave so much. In a world where success often seemed defined by wealth and power, Sarah embodied true strength, resilience rooted in compassion. He decided then and there that he needed to repay her kindness, not out of obligation, but as a way to honor the values his father had instilled in him long ago: humility, empathy, and integrity. But how could he do it without overwhelming her? After all, Sarah wasn't the type to accept charity lightly. James knew he'd have to approach this thoughtfully, ensuring his gesture felt like an opportunity rather than pity. What started as admiration for a simple act of kindness was quickly transforming into a plan. One that would not only change Sarah's life, but also bring him closer to his father in ways he hadn't anticipated. James Thompson wasn't a man who acted on impulse. Known for his meticulous planning and calculated decisions, he approached this situation with the same precision he applied to his business ventures. But beneath his composed exterior, there was an undeniable urgency, a desire to act quickly before Sarah's circumstances worsened further. Over the next few days, James immersed himself in learning everything he could about her life. He visited the diner multiple times, always sitting inconspicuously in a corner booth, observing Sarah as she worked. Each visit deepened his admiration for her resilience. Despite the stress of juggling 2 jobs and raising a child alone, she never lost her warmth or patience with customers. She laughed at their jokes, remembered their orders, and even offered comforting words when they seemed down. One afternoon, while Sarah served coffee to a group of construction workers, James noticed her daughter, Lily, waiting quietly by the counter. The little girl sat coloring in a notebook, occasionally glancing up to wave at her mother. Her clothes were simple but clean, and her smile lit up the room whenever someone complimented her drawings. "She's quite the artist," James remarked casually to Joe, who stood nearby refilling condiment dispensers. "That's Lily," Joe replied with a proud grin. "Just like her mom. Full of heart. Keeps Sarah going, I think." James nodded thoughtfully, watching as Sarah knelt beside Lily during a brief lull in her shift. They whispered conspiratorially, sharing a laugh that echoed softly through the diner. It was clear how much they meant to each other, their bond unshakable despite the challenges they faced. But James also saw glimpses of struggle. One evening, after closing time, he noticed Sarah speaking urgently on the phone outside the diner. Her shoulders slumped as she listened intently, nodding occasionally before ending the call with a heavy sigh. Later, Joe mentioned offhandedly that her car had broken down again, leaving her scrambling to find alternate transportation for her early shifts. Determined to piece together a clearer picture, James expanded his search beyond casual observation. He reached out to mutual acquaintances, scoured local community forums, and even spoke briefly with neighbors who knew Sarah from her apartment complex. What emerged was a portrait of a woman whose strength far exceeded her resources. A single mother fighting tirelessly to provide stability for her daughter while grappling with mounting bills and dwindling hope. Yet, amidst it all, one thing stood out: Sarah's unwavering commitment to helping others. Whether it was covering meals for struggling customers, donating tips to coworkers in need, or simply offering a listening ear, she consistently put others ahead of herself. By the end of his investigation, James felt a profound sense of clarity and responsibility. This wasn't just about repaying kindness. It was about creating opportunities for someone who deserved them more than anyone he'd ever met. He began drafting a plan, one that would not only alleviate Sarah's immediate burdens, but also empower her to build a brighter future. And though he didn't yet know how she would react, he was certain of one thing: Sarah's life was about to change forever. Weeks passed, and Sarah continued her routine, unaware that someone had been quietly observing her every move. Then, one crisp morning, as she prepared for another grueling day of work, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was addressed to her in elegant handwriting with no return address. Curious, she opened it to find a formal invitation printed on heavy cardstock. "Dear Miss Sarah Collins, you are cordially invited to meet with James Thompson at his corporate office on Friday afternoon. Please RSVP to confirm your attendance." Sarah frowned, puzzled. She had no idea who James Thompson was or why he wanted to see her. Was this some kind of mistake? Or worse, was it a scam? Still, something about the invitation felt genuine, so she decided to attend. On Friday, dressed in her best outfit, a modest blouse and slacks, she stepped into the sleek skyscraper housing Thompson Enterprises. The lobby buzzed with activity, executives chatting on phones and assistants rushing past with armfuls of documents. Sarah felt out of place but reminded herself to stay calm. A receptionist greeted her warmly and escorted her to a private conference room. Moments later, James entered, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Miss Collins, thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady yet kind. "Please have a seat." Sarah hesitated, unsure what to expect. "Mr. Thompson, I'm not sure why I'm here. Did I do something wrong?" James chuckled softly. "Not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. Allow me to explain." He recounted the night at the diner, the elderly man struggling to afford his meal, Sarah's selfless act of paying for it, and how deeply it had moved both him and his father. As he spoke, Sarah's eyes widened in recognition. "That was your father?" she asked, astonished. "Yes," James replied. "And let me assure you, he hasn't stopped talking about your kindness since that night. But that's not why we're here today." He paused, leaning forward slightly. "Miss Collins, I've done my research. I know about the sacrifices you make daily. Not just for your daughter, but for others as well. People like you remind us of what truly matters: compassion, resilience, and integrity. And I believe those qualities deserve recognition and opportunity. Reaching into his briefcase, James pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were documents outlining a job offer at Thompson Enterprises, along with financial support to cover her immediate expenses. "We'd like you to join our team," he explained. "Your role will involve community outreach and employee welfare initiatives, areas where your empathy and leadership can shine. Additionally, we're offering assistance to stabilize your finances, including car repairs and childcare support." Sarah stared at the papers, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know what to say. This is incredible, but why would you do this for me?" "Because you've already done so much for others," James said simply. "Consider this our way of saying thank you and investing in someone who deserves it." Overwhelmed, Sarah accepted, realizing her life and Lily's future was about to transform in ways she never dreamed possible. Sarah's new role at Thompson Enterprises wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. With financial stability finally within reach, she repaired her car, caught up on rent, and even enrolled Lily in art classes, nurturing her daughter's budding talent. But more importantly, Sarah found purpose in her work. Leading community outreach programs allowed her to amplify the same values that had guided her life: kindness, empathy, and resilience. Her first major initiative was creating a fund to support struggling single parents like herself. Drawing from her own experiences, she ensured the program provided not only financial aid but also mentorship and resources to help families thrive. Word of her efforts spread quickly, inspiring employees and community members alike to contribute. James watched with pride as Sarah transformed challenges into opportunities, not just for herself, but for countless others. Their bond deepened over time, evolving into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared goals. Even Mr. Thompson grew closer to his son, often joining Sarah and James for brainstorming sessions about future projects. One evening, as Sarah tucked Lily into bed, her daughter looked up and asked, "Mommy, are things better now?" Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Yes, sweetheart, things are much better. And you know why? Because sometimes, when we do good things for others, the universe finds a way to pay it forward." Lily yawned, snuggling deeper under the covers. "Like how you helped that grandpa at the diner?" "Exactly like that," Sarah replied softly. The ripple effects of Sarah's kindness continued to grow. Local news outlets featured her story, highlighting how one selfless act had sparked a movement of generosity and gratitude. Strangers reached out, sharing their own tales of paying it forward, inspired by her example. For James and Mr. Thompson, Sarah's journey served as a reminder of the power of compassion. They reconnected on a level they hadn't experienced in years, bonding over their shared mission to uplift those in need. So, Beyond Words reminds us, acts of kindness, no matter how small, have the power to create waves of change. Whether it's paying for a stranger's meal or dedicating your life to helping others, these moments remind us of the beauty in humanity. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond Words for more tales that celebrate the extraordinary in the ordinary. Until next time, remember, your actions matter. Keep spreading kindness, it always comes back around.